Pop goes the tyre. Anyway, roll titles. Now, just as a disclaimer, I am not mocking Lance Stroll or Max Verstappen in any way in that intro, so please, fanboys, don't attack me. Now, this video will be divided into two parts. The first will be looking at the race and how mental that ending was, and the second will be looking at tyre failures, what causes them, and why it might not necessarily be the manufacturer at fault for them going pop. And Baku once again gave us a thrilling conclusion. Like in 2017, we saw a chaotic race that ended up with Lance Stroll in a Williams almost having second, if not for being pipped to second by Bottas, in a Mercedes that was last and a lap down at one point. And that's on top of brake test gates and dodgy headrests. And while Charles Leclerc started on pole, this time, he couldn't convert it, and both Hamilton and Verstappen were past him in no time, and Perez was also able to make his way up. But then Perez seems to enjoy this track. Hamilton and Mercedes would have been hoping that the Ferrari would have been able to hold up the Red Bull, but the Red Bull was far superior on this particular track. Mercedes then got held up in the pits as Hamilton had to wait for Gasly as to avoid an unsafe pit release penalty. And I'm not sure how people can blame the pit crew for the slow stop. They had to wait. It was wait and lose 2 or 3 seconds, or get an unsafe release and lose a lot more come the end of the race, or have to hold station if they pit again. It's just not worth it. But I guess Mercedes fans aren't used to this. And that was all Red Bull needed. A sub 2 second stop for Max put him into the lead, and Perez was able to jump Hamilton as well. Although with the Red Bull's downforce advantage, you'd think that both of them might have passed the Merc eventually anyway. And while Hamilton kept up with the second Red Bull in short bursts, he'd then back off, and Stroll's crash that brought out the safety car offered a way back into it. But the Mercedes low drag setup was great in the straight lines, but useless through that twisty middle sector. This all left Max with a coast to the end. Fastest lap achieved on lap 40 for the full 26 points, and it looked like clean sailing for the Dutchman. But with just 2 or 3 laps remaining, bang. Like Stroll, he ended up in a wall on the pit straight, having lost the rear left tyre at about 190 miles an hour. A crash that would have been pretty nasty if he'd broadsided the pit entry wall. And Red Bull were immediately on the radio asking race director Michael Masi to stop the race, as it had been the second time this had happened, in the same place. Now, the first time, it's one of those things. You know, Stroll had been going a long time on those mediums. But the second time... Now, understandably, in the red flag period, all the cars took new soft tyres for the 2-lap sprint to the end, as if it was set to quick race mode on a video game. And after being off the pace in the 3 practices, Hamilton had an opportunity to bag Perez off the line, take the lead into turn 1 and stay there, because he had been lapping quicker than the Mexican on occasion. If he could get ahead, probably could have pulled away, or just kept far enough ahead that Perez couldn't keep up down the straights. But unfortunately, Hamilton locked up into turn 1 and had to file back in at the rear of the field. Now, in hindsight, probably should have stayed in second and got 18 points, but not many champions would have just settled. Except for Prost, I guess. So what happened? The Mercedes has what's called a magic switch. I don't know if the other teams have one or why it's called the magic switch, but all I know is that what it does is it shoves the brake balance all the way to the front, so you get all the braking at the front, and it's easier that way to then get more heat into the brakes for the start. Then, either one of 2 things happened. Either Lewis forgot to turn the switch back to normal, or while making last minute adjustments, he knocked that switch back on. So when he went into turn 1 to get past Perez, he had way more brake balance at the front than he was expecting, and he locked up and went straight on down the escape road. I did that in a touring car race once. Turn 1, paddock hill, Brands Hatch. Too much rear brake, car snapped, and I wiped out my own teammate. Lewis still hasn't forgiven me. And that 1 Series BMW with the short wheelbase was an absolute pig of a car sometimes. I should have taken the Subaru. Now, obviously, that's a video game and not real life, but to paraphrase the infamous wrestling interview, it's real to me, damn it. Tangents aside, Checo took the win, while Vettel took a surprise but no less deserved second place for Aston Martin after his absolutely woeful final season last year with Ferrari. And there, he made the podium just once, in Turkey. He also got Driver of the Day, which, again, was deserved. People voted for the actual Driver of the Day this time and not a banter vote for the memes or the popular vote. Hamilton owned up on social media for his mistake and apologised to the whole team for what was his cock-up. But as we've seen before, a pissed off Lewis Hamilton is dangerous. They're back at a purpose-built track next time out, and he'll be a man on a mission, like he was on his comeback drive at Imola, then into Portugal, and we've seen these drives at Hockenheim in 2008, Hungary 2014 and Monza last year, to name a few. The win extends Red Bull's constructors' lead by another 25 points, and while Mercedes and Hamilton will be cursing the opportunity for another 25 or 26 if they got the fastest lap, or even just settling for the 18 to get the championship lead back to pre-Monaco gaps, they will still be able to see some sort of silver lining that gap at the top remains at just 4 points. At the next race at Paul Ricard, Red Bull won't be able to run their super flexy rear wing anymore, and we will need to see what is said about that in the coming week or so, as that could add some extra spice to the championship. If that wing is indeed worth 3/10 or so a lap to Red Bull, they could be on the back foot at a fast circuit like Paul Ricard. The Mercedes has shown it is better at real circuits as opposed to street circuits, so we should see much better performances, well, more normal performances soon. That is, if Bottas can pull his finger out. And that said, he was doing pretty well at Monaco pre-wheel nut. But while Checo, Seb and Gasly should have got all the plaudits, the internet was talking about two things: Max's blowout and Hamilton's brakes, and fans on either side being their usual petty selves. So what can cause a tyre failure beyond the Pirelli bird? And that's a point I need to address first. It's not that Pirelli can't build a tyre. They use P0s in GT3 races and they seem to be doing just fine. The FIA tells Pirelli to build tyres to a certain specification. The FIA could say make a tyre that lasts the whole race and Pirelli will do it. But the FIA wants tyres for a 1-stop, maybe a 2-stop race for entertainment purposes, so that's what Pirelli has made. FIA says, we want a tyre that does X. Pirelli builds that tyre, the results aren't quite what the FIA had in mind, and Pirelli are the ones that get the fingers pointed at. Which is quite damaging for the brand, really. So when people cry that Pirelli bad, Pirelli can't make a tyre, look at the people who commissioned said tyre as well. People on the internet saying bring back the tyre war. Yeah, a tyre war that Bridgestone won all but 3 seasons of between 1997 and 2006. Excluding 99 and 2000 when they were the sole tyre supplier, obviously. So back to reasons why a tyre can go bang. Now the first is obviously something not being fit for purpose. The most obvious example being Michelin at Indianapolis in 2005. That year, F1 had its absolutely ridiculous one set must go through qualifying and race and you can only change one tyre on safety grounds rule. Michelin had the better tyre that year, and didn't design the tyre with that one corner at Indianapolis in mind. They also failed to do their homework, not realising that the track had been resurfaced between the 2004 NASCAR race there and the Indy 500 that May. Bridgestone's parent company Firestone grabbed all the data it could through the month of May and sent it the way of the people building the F1 tyres. Firestone had altered their construction ever so slightly to deal with the Indy 500, and Bridgestone altered theirs to allow for the high loads going through Indy Turn 1, which is F1 Circuit Turn 15 on that particular layout. The grooved surface didn't help, and Shane Bear explained that the tyre would dig into the groove and get more grip on the surface. A bit like Velcro, I guess, and that pulled the Michelin and Ralf Schumacher's Toyota apart. In 2004, Schumacher suffered exactly the same failure, but it could have been dismissed as one of those things. In 2005, the blowouts happened to 2 cars from the same team, so it could be dismissed as the team being in the wrong. It hasn't happened to Williams, it hasn't happened to Renault, it hasn't happened to McLaren, it hasn't happened to Red Bull, and the team being in the wrong is another way that tyres can fail, and this happened in another series. In the Australian V8 Supercar Series in 2017, at Phillip Island there were 13 tyre blowouts on the rear tyres and 5 blowouts on the fronts. It was later revealed that to gain more grip in the track's long corners, teams were running as much as 8 degrees of camber and lowering the pressures in an attempt at getting more mechanical grip. Now the general rule of thumb is, if you lower the pressures you get more rolling resistance and grip at the expense of tyre life, and the opposite for pumping the tyres up more. With low pressures it's easy for the tyre to flex and you get more rubber in contact with the road. Imagine, I guess, a football fully pumped up and you get your laces right into it. it's going to go into orbit. Take the air out, it's not going anywhere. With it being pumped full of air, it's solid. With the air out, it's all floppy. In the case of the Dunlop Sport Maxes used by the V8 supercars, imagine an elastic band or a guitar string. Stretch it a few times, it'll be fine. You use that same elastic band over and over and over again, and eventually it's going to snap. Try playing Metallica solos on 6-month-old guitar strings that have been stretched to oblivion, it's going to go pop. Just apply the same logic to a tyre, or even a balloon. It has to be said that following race 5 of that season, the sports governing body and Dunlop mandated a maximum camber setting of 6 degrees front and 3 degrees rear, and ordered the minimum pressure to be increased from 17 psi to 19 psi for race 6. This could have been a contributing factor in the blowouts we saw in Baku. Now, Scott Mansell at Driver 61 has already done a more in-depth video on this than I could ever make, and he said that the high load through those kinks before the pit straight while the pressures are low on the left hand side could have stretched the sidewall, and the forces on the tyre at those high rotations when going in a straight line at 200 miles an hour may have torn Max's and Lance's left rears apart. Baku is an anti-clockwise circuit. Most of the load should be on the right hand side of the car. The left side, by comparison, is just along for banter at this point. There are a string of left-handers before that right that leads onto the pit straight itself. That could have probably done it. And reason number 3 is simply the driver. As has been discussed at length when the issues of track limits come up, F1 drivers are given an inch, so they'll take a mile. The best example here being the IndyCar drivers at COTA when they drove into the next postcode at a corner that Max was penalised at for overtaking off track. And again, we have precedent for this. The British Grand Prix at Silverstone in 2013. Hamilton, Massa, Vergne, Perez and Gutierrez all suffered a tyre failure. Perez, Hamilton, Massa and Vergne all suffered theirs on the left rear, as had Stroll and Verstappen at Baku. But their tyre failures were due to cuts on the sidewall picked up at turn 5, Aintree, which is the kink that leads out onto the Wellington Straight. Some drivers were full on straddling the curb with 2 wheels on the Astro and 2 wheels on the curb. Some were putting 2 wheels on the curb and the other 2 on the tarmac, but it was believed that there was a slight drop between the curb and the Astro, and that had dug into and weakened the sidewall, causing the 4 blowouts. If you remember, there was team radio urging drivers not to cut turn 5 like they had been doing to try and save the tyres. And then we had last year where Bottas, Hamilton and Sainz all had deflations in the last few laps of the race, but those tyres were on. Like with Dunlop in V8 supercars, following that race Pirelli changed its recommended lowest pressures and reverted to 2012 spec tyres. The Red Bull adapted best, and Vettel ran away with it. And reason number 4, debris. Stuff ends up on the road. In Lance's case, it could have been a small piece of carbon that broke off after a car hit a curb. It could be a piece of the titanium skid block that spat off as the car's bottomed out, just like a shaving or something like that. It could have been something left over from the F2 races. It could have been a drain cover he hit. It could be anything. Max's blowout could have been a carryover from Lance's accident, and with Pirelli finding large cuts in Hamilton's tyre when the race was red flagged, the consensus is that on both the Aston Martin and the Red Bull, this is the case. But the investigation has only just got underway. But unfortunately, a lot of people are just going to go Pirelli not fit for purpose, bad tyres, they're lying, whatever the outcome is, because Max was the one that was, in inverted commas, robbed of a win because of the tyre going pop, and his fans want someone to blame. He deserved the win, they say. But unfortunately, sport doesn't care who does or doesn't deserve a win, a line I often use when people talk about the 2008 World Championship. Damon Hill deserved the win at the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix, but his engine failed. Panis won it instead. Max probably did deserve the race win here, but Max's tyre blew and Checo was the one who crossed the line first instead. Even though Max didn't finish, luck was on his side as Hamilton couldn't capitalise. Mercedes will be working overtime in the next couple of weeks, so they hit the ground running at Paul Ricard, where, as I've mentioned, the FlexiWing saga will no doubt end because of the new test brought in by the FIA. What that does for the next chapter of this season, who knows? But it's certainly giving us plenty to talk about. So that's my thoughts on the race and what can cause a tyre to go bang, and which of the 4 reasons listed may have been the cause of the 2 biggies in the race. If you agree with my points, hit like, and for more stuff like this be sure to subscribe. Big thanks, as always, go out to the good folk of Patreon for their continued support, and if you wish to join them or join in the Discord stuff, then all the links you need will be in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.